Thank you very much. It's good to get the staff, isn't it? You know, wow, that's very impressive. Thank you, Peter, very much. So this is the meeting of the East Arts District Council Development Management Committee. It's taking place on 15th of June 2022. And in some manner, we are being broadcast to the public. Is that right? Is it live streaming or YouTube? YouTube. So tell your friends you're on YouTube, and yeah. And I will say just immediately, if anybody is watching us on YouTube, you are very welcome. The fact that you are engaged and interested enough to watch us is much appreciated. So thank you very much indeed. Right, agenda. If I could find my agenda, which I had all very neatly sorted out here. It's gone walkabout. Fine, you're going to have to give me an agenda. No, it's gone missing. Yeah. Oh, it's there. Right. Okay. Jolly good. Please read it. Item 1 on the agenda is the appointment of a vice chairman. This is the first meeting of this committee in this civic year. So do I have any proposals for Tim?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to propose Tony Stowe, who's served us well in the past, and I'm sure he'll continue to do a good job in the future.
Thanks very much, Tim. Seconder, anyone? Oh, lots of hands. Goodness me, very popular chap. Peter Ruffles.
I'm happy to second, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes. My guide here, without whom we would be lost, is just reminding me that I need to ask if there are any other nominations. No, hands have all gone down very firmly now. So it's time for a vote. I'm anticipating that the vote might go in your favour, Tony, but let's see what happens. So all those in favour of Tony Stowe becoming the vice chairman. There you go. Okay. I think that means you can come and join us up here, Tony. Thank you very much. Good. Okay, good. So excellent. So we know who you are, Tony. That's very, very, very good. Item 3 is chairman's announcements. It's good your Peter's here, isn't it, really? Item 2 is apologies, and we have one apology, which is that Ian Kemp has been unable to be with us this evening. I'm very pleased to say that Councillor Suzanne Rutland-Barsby is substituting. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Thank you. Now it's chairman's announcements. I have no chairman's announcements. I'm just looking at Karen in case through me there's anything you wish to just take the opportunity to announce. Karen, do you have any training in the programme or anything of that nature that members might be interested to know about? Not to announce tonight. Okay. I think that's called a trailer. There might be some training coming, but we're not ready to announce it this evening. Item 4, declarations of interest. Tony.
Sorry. Yeah, I'd like to declare an interest in respect of agenda item 6B, which is the application from 3/21/1925 FFUL. Removal of buildings and permanent siting of a caravan to be occupied by Esquire and Watson worker. The association works on Turkey Farm, Brookbridge Lane, Datchworth, Hertfordshire. I previously made a referral request to the chair for this matter to come before the Development Management Committee, citing planning reasons. Whilst the proposed conditions have addressed those and alleviated my concerns, I feel it could be perceived to have judged the application by the virtue that I made the referral request. I will therefore not be taking part in the decision-making process on this application and will leave the chamber when we reach item 6B.
Thank you very much, Tony. Okay, very good. Now we move on to item 5. This relates to minutes of 2 previous meetings. The earliest is the meeting that we had on the 22nd of February, and the later one is the meeting we had on the 2nd of March. These minutes are both relatively long, so I'll just take them separately. The first set of minutes begins at page 6 of the pack. So we just take those minutes. If anyone has any comments. Tim? The minutes at page 6 are the minutes of the meeting that took place on Tuesday, the 22nd of February. Page 18. Peter's asking if you could put your microphone on, Tim, please. Thank you. Okay, so we're with you on page 18.
Page 18 is a very small amendment, and the first full paragraph, the last 3 words, Riverway crossing. Riverway is a road, so I think we should have capital letters.
Yeah.
For river and way.
Yeah, that's fine. I'd agree with that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Tim. No. Okay. So in that case, subject to that small correction, I think we need to just take a vote on this. So can I have a proposer? Terence has proposed, a seconder. Peter Ruffles. All those in favour of these minutes? Thank you. And Suzanne, I take it you're abstaining because you weren't at the meeting. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, and then the second set of minutes that we have to regularise, formalise, are the minutes of the meeting that took place on Wednesday, the 2nd of March. These begin at page 43 of the pack. Any comments? No. In that case, do I have a proposer? Thank you, Ben. And a seconder? Carolyn, thank you. All those in favour? And again, that's everyone apart from Suzanne, and you're abstaining again for obvious reasons. Very good. Thank you all very much. We now move on to item 6, which are planning applications, and strictly item 6 begins at page 63 of the pack, but we'll move straight into item 6A, which begins at page 67 of the pack. Item 6A is application 321-1576/OUT. It relates to demolition of existing buildings and redevelopment of site to create up to 20,590 square meters of commercial development in use classes EG, B2 and B8. Outline application with all matters reserved except for access at Silkmead Farm Industrial Estate, Hare Street, Hertfordshire, SG9ODX. And I will ask the case officer, Femi Lawanzi, please to present this to us. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just before I start my presentation, I'd just like to draw members' attention to the additional representation summary. Since the report has been completed, we have received some further comments on the application. One from a neighbour raising issues about pollution and noise. One from Barkway Parish Council raising concerns about lack of communication and the unacceptable impact of the development on the village. And one from Barley Parish Council raising similar issues, and that has been also supported by a comment from a county councillor for Royston East and Ermine, and in support of the comments from both parish councils. The comments raised are noted. In terms of consultation, we have complied with the statement of community involvement, and unfortunately there is a limit to how far we can consult. The parish councils referred to are not within East Herts district. They are within North Herts. And this is the reason why they haven't been consulted on the application. But I would just like to assure members that we have consulted in full compliance with our statement of community involvement 2019. Other comments raised have already been raised by other consultees and have been responded to within the body of the report. So with that, I will move on. I'd just like to say that this is an outline planning application. It's different to a full application. An outline application is used to gain an understanding from the local planning authority about the acceptability of the principle of a development. If the principle is acceptable, then afterwards further details will come forward.
Femi, can I just ask you to go and hold for a minute? It's been drawn to my attention that some of the members can't see the screen very well, and it's because the lights are on in the room, I think. Is that right, Sally? Do we have someone who knows where the all the lights are, please? Thank you. Is that better, Sally? And can you turn some more lights off, please, Peter? Good, excellent. Yeah, lovely. Okay, thank you, Femi. Carry on. Do carry on.
I'll start again. This is an outline planning application. It's used to gain an understanding from the local planning authority about the acceptability of a principle. Unlike the full planning application, it does not allow at this stage for the developer to commence development. What if the principle of the development is acceptable, then further details will be submitted within a 3-year timescale to the local planning authority for consideration. And those additional details are called reserved matters. With outline applications, a developer can submit quite limited details. Sometimes it's just simply a red line boundary to indicate this amount of development will go on the site. In this case, the applicant has submitted details that show that access for this development, only access is being considered this evening. Everything else, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, will be reserved for future consideration. So I would just like to highlight the fact that it is only access that is being considered in detail this evening. Referring to the screen, that is.
Sally?
Clarify that if I wanted to ask a question about biodiversity, that's not in tonight's discussion. We're just doing that.
We are only approving access this evening. Biodiversity has been conditioned for future consideration, but is only access that is being considered this evening. Referring to the screen, the slide shows the site, Mead Industrial Estate. This site has been designated as an employment area since 2007 in the local plan, and it remains as such in the district plan 2018. And that slide shows the entirety of the site. It is not completely covered with development, but it does show where existing buildings are at the moment. As I said before, that details will be submitted for the layout, the scale and the appearance of the development later on. But this evening only considering the access into the site. The proposed development will provide a combination of uses within classes E, G, which is office and light industrial, class B, which is general industrial, and class B8, storage and distribution. These are uses that are already on the site. The site provides at present 6,000 square meters of floor space, and it is proposed that this will be increased to 20,590. That's the maximum. It doesn't necessarily mean that the developer will be able to get all of that quantum of development on the site, because we have proposed conditions that will restrict the height and restrict the positioning of buildings. But 20,590 is considered to be the maximum form of development that can be accommodated on the site. The site is considered to be suitable for development. The proposed access is to be improved. At present, it is the current access is a single access point, which is adjacent to a residential property called Cherry Tree House. And the proposal is to close off that access, move it south 9 to 15 meters and increase its width so that it can take 2 vehicles can pass, 2 HGVs, if the site is to be used for HGVs, can access that point without interfering with one another and without affecting the amenity of the occupier adjacent to the site. The proposal comes forward with sustainable transport principles, and that will include a mobility hub, which will be provided on the site. That mobility hub will provide a links bus and taxi drop-off and pick-up point, a site storage with e-bike charging, sheltered waiting area, lockers, changing rooms. It will also include a travel plan and a travel plan notice board. An overarching travel plan is to be provided, and that's conditioned. And on top of that, a bespoke travel plan will be required for each individual unit that will be occupied on the site. The development is proposed in phases, and condition 2 in the report requires the developer to submit a phasing plan that will outline how they seek to try and provide opportunities for existing occupiers on the site to be retained, as well as providing a variety of sizes of units so that all potential occupiers can be provided for. It is noted within the report that the local flood authority have raised concerns about the capacity of the site to provide sustainable drainage options. We have noted their updated concerns, and we have conditioned these details. We do not consider at this stage that the concerns raised by the local flood authority prevent the council from determining an application that only seeks to provide access into the site. So those details will be secured at a later stage. And I would like to assure members that there are a full range of conditions proposed in this report. Granting permission for access this evening will not enable any development to come forward without discharging all the conditions that are set out in this report. If they're not able to be discharged, then the development will not be able to proceed. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide shows the proposed access. This is the only point that we are considering this evening. And as you can see, that shows a double access point, which is completely different to what is currently on the site. That width has been considered acceptable by the Highway Authority. Next slide, please. And this final slide shows the landscaped buffer, which is referred to within the report. The green areas around the boundary of the site are the areas that we have determined that we wish to retain as landscape, and so that any development that comes forward can only take place within the brown area. However, the details of the layout of all the units, including the roads within the in a future application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Femi. Thank you. I think we now move on to public speakers, and we have some in relation to this application. The first speaker we have who will be speaking against the application is Rajpal Singh Gatura. I'm sure I've pronounced that wrong, but I did my best. If you'd like to come up now, and if you, traditionally we have the public speaker sits in that seat there, and do not start until I've given you the rules of engagement. So the rules of engagement are that you have, just don't do anything at all, that you have 3 minutes. 3 minutes will start from when you press the button and the light goes red. And then when you get to 3 minutes, if you are still speaking, you will be cut off. Over to you.
Good evening. I'm the owner of Cherry Tree House, and I strongly object to this planning proposal for the following reasons. 1, scale of development. The council state that the main issue for consideration is whether the proposed quantum and type of development is appropriate for this site. I say no. Policy Bill 4 states that proposals must be in scale with the location, and that only small scale proposals are likely to be acceptable in Group 2 villages, Hare Street. The proposal looks to expand the existing floor space by at least 4 times. This is a massive increase, and they're not in keeping with Policy Bill 4, which the council recognises in its report. And I find it incredible that the justification provided by the council, and I quote, Policy Bill 4 does not preclude larger proposals, can be used given that it contradicts the spirit of the policy in the first place. I finally note that in the council's pre-application feedback to the applicant, they noted that a smaller scheme, approximately 19,000 square metres, is considered as being preferable as it proposes a smaller quantum on the development. This application is larger than that, and more crucially, the council has set precedents on its preferred development size. 2, traffic generation. The scale of the development will increase the amount of traffic being generated, especially along the B road. The applicant states that it will increase by 70% in terms of the number of vehicles accessing the site. The proposal will also increase the amount of industrial traffic to the area, with up to 100 new HGVs utilising the site, according to the application. Specifically, this will create a traffic hotspot right next to Cherry Tree House. We note that for the non-reserved matter of access, a new access point is being introduced 9 to 15 metres south of the existing one, and will start in front of Cherry Tree, as the picture showed, where it previously did not, a point recognised by the council, as by the picture. In our consultations, we proposed moving the new access point at least 20 to 25 metres south of the existing one, which would have the effect of a larger landscape buffer along our boundary, but also move the traffic hotspot away from directly in front of Cherry Tree House. Our proposal was willfully ignored. 3rd, noise and air pollution. The applicant's proposal will increase the noise and air pollution in the area. The applicant's own noise assessment report notes that without mitigation, the size and volume of the proposed business areas, so B2, B8, would create a volume impact between 55 to 65 decibels at various points, which would primarily affect the residents residing in that area. This is made worse by the noise pollution if the arrival of 1 HGV entering the site, which is recorded at 90 to 100 decibel points. The noise reports by the applicant also states that no HG activity, driving or loading, be allowed in the areas close to the receptors, aka the neighbours. This suggests the proposal's own report is recognising the adverse and the harmful level of the proposal and would produce. It would also indicate that the classes of business being proposed for the site, aka B8, are unviable. Thank you.
That was very well timed. Very, very well.
Oh, I
timed.
had to stop.
Okay, well done. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you. And we now have a speaker in favour of the application. This is Simon Andrews of DLA Town Planning, who Mr. Andrews is the applicant's agent. I'm assuming you know the rules of engagement, but I will nevertheless remind you. So it's exactly the same. 3 minutes from when you press the button and the light goes red, and we will cut you off if you're still going at 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen. The application before you is recommended for approval by your officers, who conclude that the application is in line with the council's adopted local plan and should therefore be supported. As you've heard, the application is in outline form and provides a framework for the future development of the site. This application seeks to determine the principle of the development and the access arrangements. All other detailed matters such as the size and location of buildings will be addressed at the reserve matters stage. As the officer's report confirms, the site is allocated for employment use in the local plan. The local plan allocation covers not just the existing buildings on the site, but also the surrounding open land, therefore allowing potential expansion of the current employment use. Members will no doubt be aware of the need for more employment space in the district, both to provide jobs for the growing population and to replace employment floor space lost to other uses. The proposals will involve a substantial increase in job numbers, estimated around 375 additional jobs on site and 170 further jobs in the supply chain. The proposals also offer a significant improvement in the quality of the space available, attracting a wider range of potential occupiers and increasing economic output. The plans for the site involve a wide green buffer around the edge of the development. This not only ensures a high quality and attractive setting, but also limits any impact on the landscape and on local residents. The applicant has worked extensively with the local highway authority to address concerns about traffic generation and sustainability. The proposed access meets the County Council's design requirements and is an improvement on the current arrangements. The package of measures to be delivered through a legal agreement includes a mobility hub and footway improvements. In summary, the County Council does not object to the proposals on highway grounds. There are no technical reasons not to grant planning permission. Statutory consultees are content, subject to conditions being applied. In summary, the Council has allocated this site for employment use in the local plan, and that is the starting point for this application. The proposals will deliver more jobs and higher quality employment space in an attractive setting. The application is recommended for approval by your officers, and we urge you to approve the application as recommended.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we've now got one more speaker in relation to this item, and that is Councillor John Kilby. If you'd like to come up now, Councillor Kilby. Guess what? The rules of engagement are the same. So you get 3 minutes from when the lights. If you could just turn the microphone off. If you just press the button, Suzanne will do it for you. Okay, so you get 3 minutes from when you press the button, and if you are still speaking at 3 minutes, you will be cut off. Over to you.
Over 200 local residents have objected primarily to the scale of the development and the impact of traffic along the B1368. District Plan Policy Vil 4 is the key to determining the application. It identifies the village employment areas and gives supporting text on scale. The applicant's planning statement is unsurprisingly silent upon this policy, as the proposed scale is incompatible with it. Unfortunately, the allocated planning officer has also failed to interpret this policy correctly. She stated in paragraph 8.7 that while supporting text to Policy Vil 4 references only that small scale proposals are likely to be acceptable in Group 2 villages. It does not preclude larger proposals. That is entirely incorrect. The supporting text actually states that proposals must be in scale with the location. The word must in this text is very important. Must is a modal verb, meaning that it is necessary for something to happen. The text cannot be interpreted in a different manner, so the proposal must be in scale with its location. The policy therefore entirely precludes large-scale development in an isolated rural location. The scale of the proposal is actually incomprehensible. The proposal is for a 7-hectare development, which if in residential would equate to a housing scheme for 250 houses in the middle of the countryside. The proposal will simply increase the traffic on rural roads, completely contrary to the planning framework, which is aimed at reducing the need to travel. The historic villages along the B1368 suffered horrifically from the HGV traffic when the Anstey Quarry was open. The quarry was licensed to a maximum of 60 HGV movements per day to limit the harm to residential amenity, and yet this proposal will generate substantially more harm. The applicant's travel models show that the proposal could generate over 2,000 trips per day. This would broadly double the number of trips along the stretch of the B1368. If the development was all B2, B8, as the applicants wish, then 100 of these movements would be HGVs. These trip movements could be of no surprise to the committee, as your own vehicle parking standards indicate that the proposal requires 400 car parking spaces and up to 100 lorry bays. It is clear that the proposed scale is completely incompatible with its location. I urge you as elected councillors to exercise your own judgment. I would suggest that you pay very close attention to the wording of Policy Bill 4 to prevent a judicial review, as the interpretation is black and white and should lead you to very clearly to a refusal in principle.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much to all three of our speakers. I think we go back now to Femi for your comments on the points that have been made. Femi, I've made a note of them. I'm sure you have. If you'd just like to take them in the order you choose.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the comments that have been made. If I can just start with the issue of scale and Policy Bill 4. As I said previously, this is a site that is already in use as an employment area and has been since 2007. It's accepted that the policy does refer to sensitive, small-scale employment. But that word sensitive and small-scale can have a variety of meanings, and we have sought to achieve that by imposing conditions that will limit the height of the development on this site. It can be no higher than 6 meters in any point of the site. That is considered to be small scale. That will limit the amount of development that can be. But we do also have to have regard to the size of the site and the red line bound. And as you can see, this is a big site. It will have buildings in certain locations, but there are roads that need to go in. There's parking space that needs to go in, and there's landscaping that needs to be retained. So when you combine all of those matters, you will end up with a development that is sensitive to its surroundings. That's what we sought to do with the but you know, this is an employment site, and you know, we do is an employment site. In terms of the noise and air pollution comments, we have got conditions proposed that seek to mitigate that. Just see if I can just find which condition. So if I can just bear with me a second. If I can. and deliver submission for, and there was also a condition about condition 25. which, and I believe there was also a condition about noise impact. Condition. Thanks, Karen. The number of trips per day, have been, highlighted. That has been considered by the Highway Authority. And that is what the sustainable traffic option that I have highlighted in my presentation. At this stage, you know, the proposal is for a number of uses: office, general industrial, or storage and distribution. The Highway Authority have had regard to the full potential of the types of uses that take place here, and that's why they have negotiated vehicle movements at the site. In addition, we are asking the developer to provide a plan that indicates the types of development that will come forward. So not all of the vehicle movements will be HGVs. Some of them will be smaller vehicles. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Femi. I wonder if I could just bring you back to the scale point, and specifically a point made by Councillor Kilby, who emphasised that the language that he thinks you should be looking at includes the word must. I'd just like your comments in relation to his view as to what must means, without being glib. Councillor Kilby is saying that must means must. Or Karen, as is best.
I think the policy set proposals must, however, be in scale. Is that the paragraph that's being referred to?
Yes, yes.
Yes, and like I said, I do believe that this proposal is in scale with the location, because what we are not allowing is high-rise development on this site. We are limiting the height to try and keep it to a height that is very similar to the residential properties around. So 6 meters is the highest that any building can be on the site. But you know, I have to draw members' attention to the fact that this is an employment site. This is a big employment site, and it's a site that you would expect to see, you know, sometimes buildings of a larger footprint, but what we've tried to do is the height of those buildings. So we do consider that we have considered the landscape features and the surrounds in this location.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, well, it's time for members' comments. Just before I take members' comments, I see David's got his hand up already. Can I just look to Victoria, to you for a little bit of guidance? Femi has made the point, and it's, you know, explicit in the papers, that this is an outline application, and actually the only item of detail that we're being asked to make a decision on is the access way. And rather coming back to Councillor Newton's question early on, to what degree is it open to members this evening to be asking questions that go to other issues?
Yes, so members will obviously be aware, and just re-emphasising what Femi has said. This is an outline application. We're ready to look at the access requirements in detail, and all other issues will be reserved to be determined at a later date.
So I'm sorry to press the point, but I think members will appreciate the clarity. If a member had a question that does not relate to the access way.
Then that's not relevant for the purposes of determining this application before you this evening.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Okay, so just keeping in mind that piece of legal advice, now opening it to the floor, I've got Tim Page, David Andrews had his hand up, and Terence. We'll take those three members in that order. So Tim Page, please.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure that I'm going to fall within your parameters of allowing debate on this, but in the papers before us, there are opinions held by an executive member of East Herts Council who have been directed towards this committee. And I just be interested to know if the protocol has changed, allowing executive members to give advice or opinions to this committee.
I think if I might say, I don't know if everybody's picked this point up. I think this is quite an important point that Tim has made. So just in case there's someone in the room that hasn't got the point from the papers, I think it's at page 70. It's certainly paragraph 5.1. And the executive member, for the benefit of the public, the executive member is Councillor Jane Goodeve, and she's expressed a view, and it's been recorded in these papers. I think I think you're right to make the point, Tim. I'll ask Victoria to comment in a minute, but I think the answer to your point is that it is indeed unusual for an executive member's comments to be recorded in the papers. And subject to Victoria's advice, I think it's quite important that we apply no more weight to that comment than we would apply to any other comment. It does not carry any particular weight or importance other than any other comment might. But Victoria, perhaps you could just put that in a legal context.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And obviously, Councillor Page was correct to raise that. It is indeed unusual. I would say that we will take this away from after the meeting, obviously, have an internal officer discussion about it. But I would say for this evening, it's a 4-line opinion. It doesn't say whether or not there is an objection, or it doesn't give how do I explain it? She doesn't voice her objection or non-objection in relation to this application. So it's a little bit of just a comment on her view on the application, which you can't really have much weight to. But we will take it away outside of this committee.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. And thank you, Tim, for making the point. I think it's quite an important point you've made, and well done. Thank you. Suzanne, do you want to comment on the same point? I think you do, and then we'll get back to
yes, on the same point, because as the previous executive member, I don't think I ever actually entered anything into a report there. So
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I can't remember my batting order now. Was it David next and then Terence third? So David Andrews, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on that point, I mean, I read that with interest, but you know, I'm not unsympathetic to the trend, the strand there, which is, you know, the ecosystem of businesses that support our rural communities in particular. But it's not. I'm not adding any weight to it. I am broadly concerned. We have a mixture of interesting times. We have a mixture of imperial and metric. We have hectares, we have acres, we have square feet, we have yards, we have kilometres and portions thereof. Going forward, could we, you know, I'm not really precious about whether it be imperial or metric in any particular report, but it would be nice if there was a degree of consistency. I can comprehend equally, I cannot comprehend either equally badly, but it would be nice if we could keep to one or the other. Femi, the sustainability thing, I'm confused about. I'm going to avoid timetables if I possibly can, Chairman. But you know, it's a considerable way from the existing bus stop. There is mention of the HeartLink service, which is an excellent service and could fill some of the gap here, and provision is suggested there be provision made for that. But that is an experiment. It is potentially temporary. It is certainly extremely expensive. And at the moment, whilst we're putting a brave face on it, the actual passenger miles is not very high. So I wouldn't want to rely on that in the same way as you might a regular bus service serving a timetable, although even those these days, sadly, can be very temporary. The conditions are unusually comprehensive, which does flag up to me that this is something we've got to look at extremely carefully. We don't often get applications of this size where the conditions are that comprehensive just for an outline planning. I am troubled by the interpretation of Bill 4. I think we should be. If I could go to page 88, as fast as my fingers will take me. And refer to 8.47. This is where we talk, it talks in terms of the mobility hub and a pickup area and secure cycle storage. Now, that is not, I'm a keen cyclist, but that is not a road I would now cycle lightly. And certainly the facility is going to be open until 6 o'clock. And in the winter at 6 o'clock, it is very dark and there are no street lights and it's a narrow road. And it's actually quite a busy road. It's frequently used as a cut through and it becomes on occasions the A10 light when the A10 has problems, which it frequently does, north of between Buntingford and Royston. And that then becomes 1368, which is variously described as an A road and a B road, but I can assure you it's a B road and not a very good one, it simply becomes A10 light. And that is quite scary. So you won't catch me cycling down it. I look forward to seeing the travel plan notice board. Going also then to 850 on page 89, we're told that the 2 metre wide, 849, 2 metre wide footway connection to the bridleway. I don't really know where it goes once. I'm not familiar with the bridleway. I didn't look at that when I was there, should have done. But I'm not really clear, perhaps somebody could explain to me what happens to the traffic when it gets to the bridleway. Bridleways traditionally are not the sort of surface that you would want to trot, no pun intended, lightly down there in your dancing pumps. They're normally fairly muddy, grotty, and there's detritus because horses function. So I'd be interested to know what happens when you get down the splendid 2 metre wide footway to the bridleway. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Terence Beckett.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Actually, I'm going to probably back up everything that Councillor Andrews has said. He's covered a lot of the points I have. In terms of the 2 metres wide pathway going to the bridleway, I note that the Highways Agency had determined that the bridleways weren't suitable for people to walk down. That's why they weren't considering them as a way of getting to the site. So I think that the 2 metre footpath is just a white elephant, really, and it doesn't make this a sustainable site in any stretch of the imagination. Lincoln Hill bus stop is 600 metres away by my calculation. It was 890 by the officer's calculation. Hare Street is 900 metres away, and neither of them have a footpath directly to the site. Hare Street has one for part of the way, but it's extremely narrow. And as David said, it's not a road I'd want to be walking down, even on that pavement in the dark, given the fact that we're going to have an increased flow of traffic along that road as a result of the development. I again would agree on the issue, and you know, I wish I could come back with a happier face after not being here for so long with deferrals and not being here, but it's not by any stretch, in my opinion, compliant with Bill 4. And I think we have to look at ourselves. Many times we sit here having to apologise to residents at housing developments that go 50% over the allocated housing number for a site because it's an acceptable variation. And then we do it again here. And I think residents will feel betrayed and local plans will feel like that they're ignored and betrayed because of the scale of the development. And whilst I hear what Femi says about limiting the height and that defining the site as not being oppressive, not to be indelicate, if we have a football match with 20,000 people who are 5 foot tall, it's still 20,000 people, isn't it? You know, it's not like we're not allowing anybody over 6 foot in because it'll make it more sustainable. That doesn't work like that. And also the allocation of this site as a brownfield site is a little bit perplexing to me. Of course, the existing site that the current buildings take is brownfield, but a lot of the farmland or the land around it is farmland, which currently, if you look on Google Maps, and you can see it when you get there, is fields. So that's not been previously developed on. So at least 50% of the site, probably more like 70% of the additional area is not brownfield site, which means that there will be a reduction in drainage from runoff. And also on the issue of runoff, if we do end up going down a B8 distribution warehouse kind of thing, which will mean the storing of lorries, I would expect all of that parking to be a bunded system to be able to prevent any contamination into the highly delicate chalk water table near round. And then finally, sustainable site and a transport hub, right? Well, you'd have to be pretty blind to think that taxis are a sustainable form of transport because it's a private car driven by somebody else. So they're not sustainable in any chance. As David said, the Hearts Link is an experiment, and it's an on-demand service that may not be available at the time people want to come and people may want to go. So I would like to see, if we go down that route, that the applicant, funded by the tenants, would provide a dedicated electric bus from a local transport hub, which people could ring up for, maybe operated by some of the site security staff or something. That could be quite an innovative way forward in dealing with that. But certainly most people are going to come by car. As David said, you won't walk it, you won't cycle it. And I do not consider it, in my professional opinion, and not just as a councillor, as a sustainable site. Thank you.
Thank you. Femi, there's quite a lot there. Some of it you've actually covered previously, but I think in all respects to the points being made, if you could just take each of them, even if there is a degree of repetition, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
If I can go back to the issue that was raised about paragraph 8.43. Point 50, wasn't it? It was. Includes widening of the pavement outside of the site, and as mentioned in 8.43, it was considered that nothing really could be done to the bridleway. So you're correct. Will be increased, but there will be no change to the bridleway. But it has been looked at. And going back to the other issue of the sustainability criteria of the site, I would just that in designating this site for employment use, it would have been assumed that the sustainability credentials of the site have been looked at the time that the council designated it as an employment site. This proposal will result in an improvement of an existing employment site, and I would ask members to bear that in mind in terms of determining this application. I agree with Councillor's comment that the site is part brownfield, and there is quite a lot of land site, and the proposal seeks to a significant amount of that landscaping as shown on the parameters plan that is being approved. But I would just draw members' attention to the fact that it is only access this evening that is being considered, and no other detail, not the positioning of any building, and the conditions that we refer to in the report will control the nature of any future reserved matters that come forward. Thank you.
Can I just pick up a couple of points which I don't think you've commented on specifically, Femi, both raised by Councillor Beckett. Councillor Beckett made a reference to the parking of lorries and also a dedicated electric bus to be in effect funded by the development in some way or another. That's essentially. Do you have any comments on those points?
Sorry for overlooking that. So in terms of the mobility hub, I will just draw members' attention to the fact that the mobility hub, the provision of that, which will is proposed as a legal. So that will be in perpetuity. In terms of the parking, we will not know what the parking situation will be at this site until the reserved matters applications come forward, which will determine the layout of the site where the buildings are. That's all part of reserved matters to be considered at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Femi. I'm going to take Councillor Newton, Councillor Fernandez and Councillor Crystal. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apart from the fact that I spent hours reading the papers to discover that I'm only going to make a determination on the access, it's okay. And we've discussed everything about this application, but I've been reminded I'm only making a determination on the access. So, based on the information that I've received relating to the access, and parking absolutely everything else that we've discussed tonight, I can only determine it on what I've actually heard that relates to the access. Obviously, there's an existing site, and I'm quite supportive of mixed rural residential employment, but that's nothing to do with the access. I've heard about the HGVs, the air pollution, the noise impact of the following. So when I make my decision on this access, the first thing I think, well, it did have an access, but for some reason somebody changed it because it's going to be significantly more active. And I wouldn't want to live next door to that. Noise and impact is going to be greater. So this is all the stuff I've heard relating to the access. You've got highways not thinking it's a problem, but then we've had that before. And I've never been convinced about that. So if I'm just making a decision on the position of the access, I'm assuming the size of the access and the shape of the access, because apparently I can't make a decision on anything else tonight. I don't approve it based on the simple information that it's going to be inconvenient, it's going to be overused, it's going to be noisy, there's going to be volume and there's going to be air pollution. And where it's going to be put will impact on residents' lives that are already there. Now, I may be wrong on that, but that's my view on the access, because I can't make a comment on all the other things I studied for about 2 or 3 hours before I came to this meeting. So that's my point.
Thank you very much, Sally. I think you were next, Rishi. Sorry, Karen.
Chair, I just wanted to respond to Councillor Newton on what's being considered this evening. So this is an outline application. So the applicants will be seeking permission for the principle of the demolition of buildings and redevelopment of the site to create up to the quantum of floor space that's described in the description of development. The only element of the scheme that's been submitted in detail, so that we've got full details of, is the access. So that's the only element of the scheme that we've got in front of us today that we can make a full assessment of. Everything else is high level. So it's around the nature, the principle of development. There is a parameters plan. I don't know if you could flick to it, Femi. It's the one with that's the one.
So this plan will form part of the planning permission, and you can see that the brown area is the area that is considered, well, the proposed area where built development can take place. So that includes surfacing, parking and any buildings. And then the green buffer area is exactly what I've just said it is, which is a landscape buffer around the area that could be developed. Now, that brown area, that doesn't mean that there would be a building covering the entire footprint of that brown area, because there's obviously a lot of supporting car parking, roads, etc., that would need to be provided on the site. And as Femi said earlier, there are conditions within the planning consent that will limit and restrict the built development that comes forward. So when the reserve matters applications come in, each of those applications will be the subject of a planning assessment by the local planning authority, where we will look at the detailed design of each phase of development that comes forward within that brown zone shown on that plan. So I think it'd be disingenuous to think that we're just determining the access tonight. We're not. We do have to consider the principle and nature of development as set out in the description of development. But at this point in time, the only element that we've got in detail is the access. So that's the bit we can fully assess at the moment. The rest is reserved for later consideration and assessment. But the high level principle and nature of what's been proposed is part of the decision making this evening. I hope that's clear.
I wonder if I could just come in with a comment myself. It relates to your point, Sally. Femi or someone, can you put back on the screen the drawing that shows the proposed new access way? That's it. So my question, which I hope will help members, is if we were to give permission for that this evening, would it be usable? Because does it go any further than the drawing on the screen? And if it doesn't, does that therefore mean that in reality, no vehicle is going to use it because you don't go anywhere?
So, Chair, on the previous plan, you'll see that it provides access to a developable area, an area that has been identified for the expansion of an existing industrial site. So it doesn't technically lead to nowhere. It will lead into a developable area that will comprise industrial units and supporting infrastructure.
Yeah, yes. I mean, of course, I do get that, but what I think at least a number of members in the room, it's obvious, isn't it, are finding the distinction between simply looking at an access way on the one hand, and then looking at an access way in the context of what somebody out there might want the access way to service in the future. So a lot of the comments, a lot of the content of the paper, a lot of the comments from the public speakers don't particularly go to the access way, they go to wider issues. If, and it's an if, obviously, if we were to give permission for the access way, what's running through my mind at the moment is, and nothing else, because that's all we're being asked to give permission for, and if by magic the access way was built tomorrow, would any vehicle use it, or would it just be a kind of ghost access way that would be sitting there pending the application, which presumably will come up at some point in the future, which will be a detailed application for everything to do with the site?
Thank you, Chair. If you grant permission for this access this evening, it will not allow any development to take place. The only thing that you will be granting is the position of where that access point is into the site. What will need to happen afterwards is that the details called the reserve matters, which will determine exactly the height and the layout of the site in relation to that access, will need to come back to the planning authority for determination. And it's once all of the reserve matters have been discharged and considered, that is the stage.
Please do.
Thank you for reiterating what we've already been told. I would like to see, if I'm deciding on an access, what alternative accesses could be, so that whoever, some gentleman spoke, forgive me, about it being opposite his house when it wasn't opposite his house, and other people are talking about the impact on the area per se. I've got a little picture of an access, not in relation to the development, which I have been told over and over again is all the reasons why we will be approving it, apparently, as and when it comes. I want to know if there's a better place for an access that's less inconvenient, that could be smaller or bigger, or on a road in a field where it doesn't impact on it. I have no information about this access, and yet this is all I'm allowed tonight to decide upon. So I'll just leave it there.
Chair, I just respond by reminding members that as planning authority, we have a statutory obligation to determine the planning applications that are submitted to us. And we have assessed the impact of that access in the context of the parameters plan that was shown prior to this slide. And the Highway Authority have reviewed the application and assessed the access. And there has been no demonstrable harm identified that's contrary to planning policy, having an access located where the access has been proposed. So we can only assess what's in front of us, and there would have to be a conflict of policy for us to warrant refusal in this instance. We can't ask for different options. We're obliged to determine the proposals that are in front of us, and that's what we've done.
Okay, I've got a number of hands, but I'm taking them in the previous sequence. So we've got Rishi and Councillor Crystal lined up already. We'll take both of you and then come to another round of questions in a minute.
Thank you. Just to follow on from comments made by Councillor Newton. So I'm just trying to understand two things, because if you take it from 8.42, it says highways initially had concerns over the ability of this location, which was contrary to LTP4 and TRA1 of the East Arts District Plan. 8.43 has the words completely unsuitable in regard to the bridleway. 8.44 has the upgrade was unrealistic. Then 8.45 states that the only feasible opportunity was this 2-meter footway. Then at the very end, when it comes to 8.51, it's therefore considered the proposal would not give rise to an unacceptable impact. I'm hearing lots of reasons why things can't be improved. I'm not necessarily hearing reasons where those initial concerns have been mitigated, and have highways given a qualified opinion that they are removing those initial concerns, or is it an officer-led decision that they now no longer think that the mitigation measures put in by the applicants would meet the policies, or is highways given that specific? My other point I wanted to raise is with regards to the drawing supplied, which shows the buffer zone, which had the brown and green, would it be possible to see that again? So taking on comments noted from the applicant of Cherry Tree House, my understanding is that that plan is not accurate, because where the access way would be, you would not have a buffer zone, because the slipway into the site actually starts, from my understanding, on his boundary. So if lorries were using the entire slipway, they would actually be exiting 0 meters next to his property, not within a buffer zone. So I just want clarification on that. And he states that he had put in, and others may have put in, comments on whether it could be moved further south. Have those been taken in consideration, and why were they deemed unfeasible? Thank you.
Councillor Crystal, we'll just hold it there. We'll take those first. So, officers.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Rishi. The comments that are in the report about the highway impacts of this scheme are comments that have been led by the Highway Authority. They are happy with this scheme in terms of the highway impact. They have looked at whether it was possible to upgrade the site in terms of the bridleways, the footpaths. They've worked quite closely with the applicant, and they are has been done. Options. So those comments that you see in the report are based on the comments that they've made. In terms of the access at Cherry Tree House, at the moment the access is more or less on the shared boundary with Cherry Tree House, and the access point will be moving 9 to 15 metres to the south of its existing point. So there will be a break in that landscaped area, but that's only to provide the access point into the site. The rest will be landscaped.
Yes, Rishi, I think you should, yeah.
Thank you. Just again, to come back to this, because again, you state that it's been moved 9 to 15 meters south. But my understanding, if you look at the other drawing, which shows the specific details, yes, the previous one, that one. My understanding is it or is it not that the slipway boundary is on the perimeter, and there's a very big difference between a single access track for a small farm versus a double width access way that's going to have HGVs going up and down it throughout the day. So whilst the actual access road itself, the center point of it may have been shifted south, by its nature, it hasn't actually really moved, because it would be highways would have a requirement that you have that slipway so that lorries can exit and enter safely, and therefore has all steps been taken to mitigate impact to Cherry Tree House and the other neighbours.
Chair, I think what we're seeing on the screen is the access point that moves south, but that slide also shows visibility displays that will need to be created in order to ensure that vehicles can come into the site and exit the site safely. But the actual access point is further away from Cherry Tree House than it is at the moment. So that does improvement in their amenity.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. It's just in my head, it's still having a buffer, a map which shows a buffer zone, saying that you're going to have this landscaped buffer zone. Whilst it may be a slipway, as stated before, slipway still counts as developed part of the site.
Okay, Femi,
it is not.
Could you put the buffer drawing back on the screen, please?
Because comments made is that.
Bear with me, Rishi. Am I right with the picture in your head? Is that the access way is coming in along that, actually along that buffer?
It's the middle. My understanding is that it's the middle of the site, is it not?
In there?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what's in Rishi. It's got the access way coming in.
You're going to have a small insertion here to get into the site. That's what you're going to have.
Okay, but then the 15-meter slip radius with the slipway, does that or does that not include the designated green buffer zone on the site, on the map?
Well, the visibility is
There's a bell now, opens up. But to be fair, the line that Femi's drawing with her finger is correct.
Will be landscaped at the edges, you know, so you still have to be able to satisfy the highway authority that you can see over any landscaping to get out safely. So let's say hedges, for instance, to a certain height, but it will still be landscaped either side. But all you're going to have is a small insertion to provide access to that site. No other development in that area.
Okay, just to finish again, because I think, but my point is that when the main aspect of this outline application is on the access road, the maps being provided, in my opinion, should reflect exactly what is actually being delivered. And that map is not accurate in my view, and therefore gives a distorted view of what is actually being provided. So that is, I understand your comments, but I don't think that map is accurate. And on an application like this, where it is so crucial, I think that I appreciate it's come from the developers, not from you, but I don't think that the plan is up to scratch.
Okay, Yes, please do, David. Yeah. Yeah, it's okay.
We are being told that we should only consider. We're being told we should only consider the access. But by so doing, we are giving tacit recognition that this is going to be a huge expansion of commercial activity on this site. We're hearing about buffer zones and plants and landscaping. This is a massive, massive thing. We're told that everything possible has been done to mitigate concerns around the highways, but that everything possible is not always enough. Everything possible, what does that mean? We don't have highways officers here. It's clearly, with an access, it hangs on the highways. Nothing else, not on the waterways, not on the bridle paths, it's on the highway. Rishi, you've got it stone dead. We don't have the information before us tonight to make this decision, I would suggest.
Okay, thank you, David. Now, we've had some powerful interventions. Obviously, anyone that has questions is still very welcome to put them forward. I wouldn't want to stop that at all. But I think the last two member comments have been quite powerful and forceful. So I'm just going to look around the room again. Anybody that wishes to speak, as I say, please do, but allow for what's already gone on in the debate. So Terence.
Can I just, sorry, Bob, can I just interject and just say something, just to clarify this point about what the committee is being asked to turn tonight, because there's been an element of confusion. I just want to re-emphasise. Sorry, I just want to re-emphasise obviously what Karen said before the last round of questions. The description is in the proposal. So the proposal tonight that you're dealing with is on page 67 of agenda item 6A. Now, the purpose of an outline application is you are being at a sort of a high level in terms of that you're reading the principle of what is put in front of you, the principle of what the developer is proposing. The details will be later considered in the reserve matters application, which will be governed in the conditions. So how that's going to play out is governed in your conditions. The only part of this outline application that you have full details on is the access. So you have to take the outline as is in the proposal, but the only details you have is in relation to access, and the other details in relation to the other aspects will be later on.
All right, that's okay, Victoria. So we've got that's provoked a flurry of hands. So yes, I know you did, but anyway, I'm afraid I didn't see the sequence in which the hands went up. So I'm going to come to you later, Rishi, because you've obviously had quite a crack. So take Karen in Redfern, and then I'm going to take Ben Crystal because he's been trying to get in for a bit, and then we'll go to Ruth Buckmaster. So Karen.
There are so many points. We haven't got the detail of the access, as Rishi was saying. So that's one thing that we haven't got. The other thing is that this whole thing hangs on interpretations of words. And I think we're just not getting, the idea of scale only being about the height of a development when it's actually about the length and the width and the breadth as well as the height. The scale is the total amount. So that's another thing. We don't have access. Does that include the highways running through the villages to get to this site? Because they are going to suffer greatly from this. So I know we're just talking about this little drawing here at the moment, but I would argue that access goes much further than that. It goes to the nearest A road along the B roads. And I'm really alarmed by the number of movements that are going to be going along those roads through those ancient villages, shaking them about. That alarms me. But I think that the final point is that if we do give permission for this access, will it at a later date just be abandoned and we'll just have this little T-junction there? If approval is not given later on for the other bit, we are giving tacit approval for the outline plan if we give approval for the access. There's no getting away from that. And then it will be held against us that say, well, you've already given approval for this, so you can't disapprove of the next bit. So this is really unclear And I just don't think we can make a decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think it was Councillor Crystal next. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so many comments. I really do agree. What's that 2 metre footway for? I really don't get that. It's like putting a bus stop in when there's no bus service. It goes from nowhere to nowhere. Just nonsensical. I'm really kind of confused about what we're looking to approve. So we are looking to approve something that's about a 20,000 square metre development in terms of employment zone, aren't we? That's in the title. So it must be that and the entrance. So there's the traffic. I think there's some serious problems with this application, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much. Ruth, we'll get to you, David. Ruth Buckmaster.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go over what everyone else has said. I have to be honest, I agree with everyone. I have a query, and I'm obviously maybe very uninformed by even asking this. But when the reserved matters are determined at a future date, do they come before the DMC committee or are they determined by officers?
Yeah. David, I'll take you now and then we've gone round the...
Yeah, thank you. See, what confuses more than anything, the proposal is the demolition of, etc., etc., etc. And the application at 1.1 seeks outline planning permission of the erection of employment floor space, etc., etc., etc. Now, it is later qualified, granted, with all matters being preserved and considered at a later stage, other than the proposed access. But I don't have the information in front of me, I don't think at this stage, to make a considered judgment on the proposed access. And whether it hinges on anything else or not, I stop there. I don't have the information that I would feel comfortable making a decision of this nature. And very often we have to insist that the access is built before the first property is occupied. Here it's being offered up, an interesting alternative. But I don't feel I have the information to judge this properly. I don't have it here. I haven't seen it there. I've been out on the ground, and that was scary. But that's a subjective opinion.
Okay. Do you mind if I just respond, Dave, and ask you a question, which is that if we just take your own position, what would you be proposing that we do with this application this evening? I mean, clearly, theoretically, there are three possibilities that the committee faces. One is approve, two is refuse, and the third is defer. If there's a variation on those themes, I can't at the minute think of it. But if you wouldn't mind me putting you slightly on the spot.
You put me very much on the spot, Chairman, but as you know, many years ago, I occupied the same seat that you're currently sitting in. And my mantra was, we're here to make decisions, not to defer. I'm being hoisted by my own petard in that I don't think we have the appropriate information here, and I'm looking around the room, I think others have expressed it very well too, to make this decision this evening. So the option really is to defer, and I'm not entirely comfortable with making this decision in the absence of the information that we need to make a decision on the whole application, which seeks planning permission for the erection of, etc., etc., as eloquently outlined at 1.1. So that's where I stand at the moment. Okay. I wouldn't want to vote against, but I certainly am not going to vote for.
I appreciate you rising to the challenge of being put on the spot. Thank you very much.
Chair,
yes.
Obviously, just going on from David's, what David's just said, and also some of the other concerns for the members, that obviously deferral is an option. You have to obviously bear in mind the time. Have to bear in mind the time constraints and the risk of the non-determination. But I will obviously just be looking into officers to see whether or not they potentially could facilitate a deferral if they think that that's going to be beneficial, because that's one of the advantages of deferral. There has to be a benefit to it. It not just shelving the application to deal with that another time. So I think the committee have to be very clear if you are looking at a deferral as opposed to a refusal. What you would be wanting to see, and I obviously think I can guess, but if we just if you can just articulate that so that the planning officers have enough information to be able to go away and work with the developer to try and alleviate some of the concerns that the committee have had raised this evening in relation to the access.
Fair point, fair point. Suzanne.
I think if it were to be deferred, the reasoning would be that this committee would like to see a more detailed plan, like this plan, with the positioning of the visibility displays, the positioning of the track into the site, so that they can see the buildings, because you've got Cherry Tree House to the north, which will have a buffer, we know, but will have the visibility displays to make it safer, because I drove out of that site this morning and it's horrific coming out of that. It really is dangerous. So you've got to have the visibility displays, but has already been pointed out by officers. It's not a question of no buffer zone. It's just got to be lower and quieter so that the visibility displays can be used. But I think this drawing doesn't show us where this track is. The track drawing doesn't show it in relation to the house or anything else. I think we need a better drawing to make this decision.
Thank you. Terence.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like clarification on whether this development will come back to us for determination at a later date, more detailed, bearing in mind, I know we are only looking at this application, but bearing in mind where we find ourselves on the Bishop Stortford South employment situation. I also think if we bring this back, I would like clarification, in fact, maybe even clarification now, because the farmhouse that's going to be demolished has an access point onto the road. I'm assuming that the new access point that's being talked about is somewhere in between those two. I'd like to know why we're not thinking about having it where the one for the current house is, which is far enough away from Cherry Tree House then. And I can't see any reason why that would impact the access displays, because it's a straight piece of road there. So it's another matter of another few meters just further away. I have got other points that I would make on knocks and socks coming from vehicles, which highways won't make any determination on. They're just looking at visibility and road safety and traffic numbers. They don't really look at that kind of impact, which is kind of beside the point. I think we've moved on from that a little bit anyway, but I would certainly support deferment in having greater visibility and technical drawings on the location and size of display in relation to the whole site.
Okay, thank you very much, Terence. I think, did you want to come back, Rishi? Yes.
Just again, following on from what has already been said, but in terms of why I think a deferral potentially could be beneficial, is that we, as has been pointed out, the only full detail that has supposedly been provided for this application is the access. I personally am not convinced that full detail has been provided to make that decision, which is why I would much prefer to have better detail so that I could make an informed decision. That drawing does not show how it impacts on the property to the north or to the south of the site. It does not make it clear in terms of how that would affect potential boundary options. From the, as was said previously, we are being asked to decide on the massing and the quantum of the site. Based off of that, the site would have no access to the road because it shows a buffer from around the entire site. So it's information like that that needs to be clearer, because if we approve that site, the site would have no vehicle access, by my understanding, because anything developed on has to be on brown land, and there isn't up to the road. So that's why I think we do not have sufficient information tonight.
Yeah. Sorry.
I think we've come full circle, because that's what I asked for at the very beginning. I've got two choices. I've been cornered. I've got two choices. Deferral so I can have the information that I need to make the decision, or I'm left with a refusal, which is not going to be beneficial to anybody.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
feel cornered.
David, would you mind if I tried some sort of chairman's comments now? And if you still want to come in and comment, please do. Okay, I think we've had, we are, if I might say, we are a good committee. Did you want to come in before I speak, Tim? No. Okay, please do.
This site is an employment site, so presumably at this time they could applicant could put in an application for a change of entrance without having to go through a hybrid application for entry and for the demolition of the buildings. In the report 513, it says the indicative layout is not currently acceptable. So how do we know that the access is going to be acceptable? We've already discussed that it doesn't go very far, but where it goes beyond could have a bearing on this application. And secondly, Councillor Redfern, I think, was very right to raise the subject of traffic sustainability within the area rather than on the site. And I wondered if we could ask that if this application is deferred, could we request that a high-rise officer is present at our next meeting?
Yeah, okay. I know Karen wants to come in, but if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to attempt some chairman's comments, and then if you still feel the need. Okay, we've had, as we invariably do, a good debate. I think we take our responsibilities seriously on this committee, so thank you all very much indeed for that. I think it's very, very clear, isn't it, that to put it in neutrally, we are uneasy about the application that is presented to us. Speaking for myself, I do find it difficult to distinguish actually precisely what it is. Not so much what we're being asked to make a decision on, but what we're supposed to be taking into account. Because, you know, you might think that if all we're being asked to do is deal with an access way, then the paper would have been quite short. It only would have commented on an access way. To take Councillor Fernando's point, we would have had a very clear drawing of precisely where the access way and the displays would be. And yet we haven't. We've got an awful lot of information which, you know, we might regard as background information, and maybe some members of the room think is not necessarily particularly pertinent to an access way. So I can understand why there's an unease in the room. I am in a minute going to be, if David Andrews is still of the same mind, I'm going to ask members to propose maybe a deferral, and maybe Councillor Andrews will propose, and I'll see if there's a seconder in the room. But if we do defer this, I think it is very, very important that officers take away from this discussion. And I know very well that you've absorbed everything that's been said. I'm not suggesting you would ignore it, but it's very important you take away from the discussion the areas where we are uneasy. I think we need a lot more focus on the access way, if that's what we're being asked to decide. I think we do need very clear drawings of precisely where the access way and the visibility display and all that sort of thing will be. And I think we need to clearly understand what it is we are meant to be taking into account and what we are not meant to be taking into account. And it's for officers to prepare the report. But if there are things that we are not required to take into account relative to an application for an access way, I think officers should consider whether those things should be omitted from the next report. To come back to the point that's been made a couple of times, it's my understanding that, just speaking in general terms, that if there's an application for outline permission with reserved matters, those reserved matters do come back before this committee. So it does seem to me that quite a lot of what we've discussed this evening doesn't particularly relate to the decision that we're being told we're being asked to make this evening. It relates to the next decision, which will come to us on reserved matters. There is something slightly perverse about that, isn't there? In that, do we have the same discussion twice? And when we get to the second discussion, are we, and maybe our views have moderated, are we able to express a different view? Or you get my point. So I think that's my assessment of where we are as the chairman. Now Victoria's going to come in and comment because she wants to.
I only just wanted to obviously just add on that point in terms of clarification. The point of outline applications is that the developer just is almost dipping their toe in water to see whether or not the proposal will be acceptable in principle, and then you go away and then you have the reserved matters application for the detail element of that. Maybe in future we could have some sort of training on outline applications, which I think would be beneficial for the committee.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to what Victoria has just advised. One of the councillors raised the point about this granting planning permission for the access, and the applicant being able to implement that access, and then nothing else on the site. And just to let you know that with an outline application, you cannot implement the access or any part of that development until the reserved matters applications have been approved first. So you would never have a situation where you would just have an access there leading to nowhere. And so when the reserved matters come in, that's when you look at, well, where does that access, what does that access align with? How does that work with the layout of the rest of the site? So I just wanted to be clear on that point. And can I just make one other point, Chair, please, which was in response to the issue about the impact on the wider highway network, which I don't think we've officers have addressed. In the report, if you look at paragraph 8.50, it makes reference to a transport assessment that was submitted with the application, which included modelling data, which looked at the impact of vehicular movement arising from this development on the local highway network, and it concluded that there would not be a severe impact. Now, if we were to refuse an application on the impact on the local highway, the bar for refusing it on highway grounds is very high. And the county were very clear that from their view, after reviewing that information, there would not be a significant severe impact on the highway network. In addition, that obviously they gave consideration to the mitigation measures that would be put in place to encourage sustainable transport, which they said would assist with mitigating the impacts. But irrespective of that package of mitigation, they were very clear on that point, and I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Karen. That's appreciated. Now, we've just got to be a little bit careful that we don't talk this to death. So I've got Rishi and David with their hands up, but I've just. Okay, I just want to take Rishi first because you've made some very good
Thank you,
points.
Mr. Chairman. It's just again to come back from comments made by officers. We're being told that it's an outline application, but we're being told in another sentence that it is with full details on access. If it is an outline application, I understand. I don't need further training on that. I understand the difference in the outline application and the full application. But throughout this meeting, we have been told that there is full details on access, and that in my opinion, there is not. So either it's outline application or it's not an outline application. This strikes me as they're trying to do a hybrid where they're saying this is what we want to deliver in terms of access road. I understand reserved matters that will come back to the committee, but if this was minded to be approved, the developer would take that as this is granted. The officers and East Hearts have in principle approved this part of the scheme. So that's fine. That's my understanding.
That's fine. Okay. Now, Tony wants to make a point.
The point I was going to make was that when highways accepted this crossover, they must have had an indication of what it was going for. And that's what I get confused with. I mean, they must, if that information was available to highways to make that decision for the crossover and not to affect, then why haven't we got that information today to look at? And that's the point I make. Now, I hear what has been said, that the access cannot start until the reserved matters are agreed. But then what is the point of having a full permission on the crossover now? Why not make that part of a proper application?
Yes, I think that's an interesting point, which I suspect has been running through the minds of at least most members this evening as we've conducted our debate. David, but just before you speak, and in anticipation of what you're going to say, I just want to remind the room of Tim Page's point, which is that if and when this comes back to this committee, we would like to see a highways officer here to support the application. So just keeping that in mind, David, over to you.
Chairman, I think we've got to the point this evening where I should like to propose that we defer this application to enable the officers to come forward with potentially a simplified report more heavily focused on the contextual issues around the access. And I think also, and I think I've got the filling of the room here, but I'm sure they'll let me know if I haven't, a site visit together with a highways officer that has actually worked on this application thus far. I think a site visit will be challenging because of the nature of the road, but it will demonstrate to us all, I'm sure, and those of us who visit the sites, most of us, what the road is. But I think that would be valuable. I don't put it in there as an absolute, but I think if that proposal was considered by officers, we have done it before. We're not doing anything new and different. I think that would be helpful. So on that basis,
And you would like a highways officer?
a highways officer who has worked on this thus far.
At the next meeting. If it comes
At the
to-
next meeting, indeed, yeah, and on the site visit.
Yes, yes. Okay, so I've got that proposal. Rishi is seconding.
And sorry, I know I've had a lot of bite of the cherry tree house. I appreciate. Sorry for the pun there. In the deferral, obviously, we've asked for more information to come forward. I would also ask if cordially whether officers may speak to the applicant and just assess the possibility of whether that access point is far enough south to reduce the impact on Cherry Tree House without impacting on the highways assessment. So we give the opportunity, because obviously the highways have made a determination that it's great, but it's not great for that gentleman over there, is it? So maybe they could have a look at whether that could move a little bit further south.
If I may, I think we're going to leave David's proposal as is, but officers, I'm looking at officers now, officers acknowledge Councillor Beckett's point and will take some steps to have a conversation with the applicant. Yeah, good, excellent. So I've got a proposal for a deferral, I've got a seconder for a deferral. All those in favour of deferring? Very good. And that was a full house. So thank you all very much indeed. I thought that was an extremely good debate. Well done, everybody. Thank you. And thank you, officers, too. It's you know, we don't very often, as David said, defer applications, but I think on this occasion it's the right thing that we've done. But thank you for the work you've done so far. Thank you. Right, you're going to leave us, Tony?
I'm going to leave you now.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll have to. Yeah. That's an interesting one.
Yep. Thank you, Femi.
You're welcome. We'll see you soon. I'll be back.
Yeah, I'll be back. That's what Carl said. Tony actually gone on that. Oh, that's his laptop. Oh, he's handing in the back. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll probably try this out.
All right. Okay, everybody. Great, Victoria, Karen. Yes. Yeah, we're fine. We're fine. Okay, we've obviously driven lots of people away from the room, haven't we? But yeah, okay. Well, that was very interesting, everyone. Well done. I thought we stepped up to the plate really well there, actually. Now, we're moving on now. So we're on item 6B. 6B commences at page 119. 6B is application 321-1925 FUL. It's in relation to the removal of outbuildings and the permanent siting of a caravan to be occupied by an equestrian worker and associated works. The location is the Old Turkey Farm, Brookbridge Lane, Datchworth. This is before us this evening because there was a referral from the ward councillor And that was Tony Stowe, and that's why Tony has left the room for this item. So, Richard, will you be presenting? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, and good evening to members of the committee and the public. I haven't presented to you before in the past, so my name is Richard Freeman. I'm one of the team leaders in the development management team. I'm really sorry, I've got a really bad cough, so apologies if that interrupts the presentation. The application before you is at the old turkey farm, which is located just outside Datchworth, which is a Group 2 village, and it is for the removal of various outbuildings and the permanent siting of a caravan to be occupied by an equestrian worker with associated works. As the chair has just said, but maybe I can just reiterate, this is a minor application. It isn't one which would normally trigger consideration by planning committee, and is here due to the referral which Councillor Stowe spoke to earlier. I propose, if I may, just to take you briefly through the site's background and what is being proposed and the main considerations, and then briefly touch on some of the representations made. So you can see hopefully on the slide in front of you, and in the information submitted with the application, the red line outline of the planning application sites. The application and the blue line is land within the control of the applicant to the north. Historically, this was a farm, and over the years it has developed, and that use has changed slightly, so it's now more in an equine use, previously used for polo and for rearing and preparing horses for that, but now more of a livery business. There's a detailed equine needs assessment submitted as part of the application, which some of you may have seen, and which is set out in the summarised in the report in front of you. The site is located within the Metropolitan Greenbelt, and the village boundary runs along Brickbridge Lane, which you can see running north-south just to the east of the application site. So effectively the east-hand side of that is within the village. This is outside of it. I think at this point I might just talk briefly, if I can, about the sustainable location of development, which is clearly an issue which we went into in some detail in the previous application. As you know, policy DPS2 sets out our development strategy. So we direct development towards the most sustainable locations, being the town centres, and then being the villages, and then the areas outside of those, in general terms, are not sustainable locations for development. However, there are exceptions to that, and it can be necessary for there to be housing outside of these areas in less sustainable locations, and policy HOU 5 covers that, and that's where you have dwellings for rural workers. And so that's the situation which we've got in front of us. The proposal is for this caravan to be used by somebody who would work on this site, and so as long as HOU 5 is satisfied, that is of more significance in the development strategy, which directs development towards more sustainable locations. I might actually, if I may, just at this moment talk about HOU 5 in slightly more detail. There's 3 strands to the policy. Effectively, you've got to be satisfied that the accommodation is essential to the needs of the business, that the business is viable, it's not going to fall tomorrow, and that there's no other accommodation available. The consideration of this is set out in detail from paragraph 8.5 onwards, but in summary, we've reviewed this in detail and we are satisfied. The supporting statement goes into a lot of detail as to what could happen on the site if there is not supervision. This is a livery stables at this point. There are horses who are sick and ill and need supervision. Horses can be affected by a number of illnesses and can be spooked by various things. And if there isn't someone who can get to them relatively quickly, then that can be a risk of life, not just to the horses, but others. And it details some instances where horses almost made it onto the highway with associated concerns around that. I won't go into it in full detail because it's in your report, but we did feel that that strand was on balance and that there could have been some more information submitted, but actually given the scale of the proposal in front of us, we are satisfied that that has been met. This is a business which has been going for a number of years, and in fact it has enlarged. As you will see from the planning history, there was a temporary consent granted for a smaller caravan, and since then the use has grown. More horses have been taken on. The livery business has expanded. That's positive. Policy ED2 talks about rural employment, and so it's good that the business is viable and it meets the second strand of HOU 5. The third strand is about other accommodation being available. And again, we're satisfied that there isn't other accommodation reasonably available. This is going to be occupied by a worker who's working at the delivery, at the livery yard as a yard manager, and so they do need accommodation, but the type of remuneration or wages which they would receive does mean that effectively other accommodation which is available in the wider area is likely to be outside of their reach. And as I set out earlier, in order to be able to manage the yard effectively, they need to be within a local area as well. So effectively, whilst this is Greenbelt, and I'll come on to the Greenbelt in a bit more detail in a moment, we wouldn't normally allow a dwelling in this kind of a location because it's so closely tied to the rural business going on, and those three strands of the policy have been met. We're satisfied that's an appropriate location. And conditions 4 and 5 of the recommendation talk directly to that. So effectively, this can only be used by someone working at the site and needs to be removed if the use of the wider site goes on to being something else. I have the next slide, please. This is taken from the applicant's design and access statement, and it's a close-up aerial photograph of the parts of the sites which is actually for the proposed developments. It labels well quite clearly, so I'm not going to point things out, but I'd like to draw your attention to the existing temporary building. As I said, there's a 2018 consent for a smaller caravan on the site, and it is proposed that as a result of this development, which is there's a proposed site plan in a moment, but the proposal would be on the left-hand side of the site, where it says siting of proposed permanent dwelling. If this were to be approved, the temporary dwelling would be removed, the shed, the pole barn, and the log stroke machine store would also be removed. As you know, Greenbelt, development within the Greenbelt is inappropriate by its very nature, unless it meets one of the exceptions which are set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. Two exceptions are relevant in this instance. One is the partial or total redevelopment of a previously developed site, and the other is a change of use. Caravans operate in a slightly niche section of planning legislation, in that if they meet certain tests and requirements, they are movable structures, and so the structure itself does not require planning permission. The use of that part of the site for that purpose does, but if various tests are met, it's a movable building, and movable buildings are temporary and do not require planning permission in certain instances. And so for that reason, the exception in the NPPF around changes of use applies in this instance. It's actually technically the use of that part of the land for the siting of a caravan, which is what needs to be considered. Maybe that's a slightly moot point, or something which planners would look at in a lot of detail. The point is that there's an exception to inappropriate development in the Greenbelt for changes of use and the redevelopment of previously developed sites, as long as they preserve the openness of the Greenbelt. So one of the fundamental characteristics of the Greenbelt and why it's designated is about its open nature. On the basis that those structures would be removed, there's actually a net reduction in floor area and volume of built form, and as a result of that, the openness of the site is preserved. The area of the site, which, if I could ask on the next slide, please, to be developed, is on the left-hand side there. So it's not as if it's introducing development into a part of the site which has previously not been developed, and so might have more of an impact on openness beyond the calculations of the floor area. So those are the two main considerations which need to be taken into consideration in our advice to you: the rural dwellings issue and the Metropolitan Greenbelt. And as we set out, we're comfortable with the proposals from those considerations. I don't want to go into any detail on any of the other issues which are set out in the report, but I would just like to draw members' attention very briefly to part 7, summary of representations. We've received 2 responses, as well as Councillor Stowe's request for DMC consideration. The responses are set out there, but effectively, hopefully those have been addressed. This doesn't, well, planning creep is something which, as planning officers, we would always resist anyway, and we'll always consider every application on its own merits. There are very specific reasons in our eyes as to why this proposal is acceptable, with those conditions to tie it to the site and to make sure that if the site moves on or things change significantly, that it needs to be removed. There've been excuse me. There have been points raised by local residents about the coloration of the caravan, and it is proposed to be in something which would meet the requests of local residents. And there are some positive comments made there as well. Councillor Stowe's concerns were about the impact on the green belts, and that there are some units on the site or some structures on the site which do not require planning permission. I believe he said so earlier in his declaration, but he has confirmed to officers that he is satisfied with the considerations set out in the reports. And the recommendation, Chair, is for approval, and there are no late matters for an addendum. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. Thank you. Okay, we turn to public speakers. We have no speaker against, but we do have a speaker in favour. That's Stuart Miles, who I suspect is the one person remaining in the public gallery. And you've heard the rules of engagement several times, but nevertheless, we'll go through it again. So you get 3 minutes from the moment the red light comes on the microphone, and we will stop you at 3 minutes if you're still speaking then. So over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. We welcome the officer recommendation to approve this application. I'd like to explain why someone needs to live permanently at the Old Turkey Farm. It's a successful and growing equestrian business. In 2018, planning permission was granted for someone to live on site for 3 years in order to look after the horses on site. And the officer's report for the 2018 application noted the following, and I quote, "The livery has existed on the site for some 34 years and has become successful at managing and rehabilitating damaged and sick horses, as well as breeding a limited private stock of polo ponies. The caravan has been on site for some time and made provision for limited overnight supervision of the horses. This has become more necessary as the livery provides for more rehabilitation of horses and ponies. So temporary permission was granted in 2018 on the basis of an essential need for a rural worker to live on site to supervise the horses. And that need was met by the existing caravan. The business continues to grow. In 2018, there were 15 horses on site. Now there are 17. The horses are just as likely to come to grief or to become sick now as they were in 2018. Horses that are being rehabilitated need round-the-clock care, but even healthy horses can suffer from colic, which can be fatal without early diagnosis and treatment. Horses can become cast, where they fall over and get stuck, and then they panic, and this can be fatal too. We all know that horses can take fright and bolt and potentially end up on the road, or they can get caught in the fences. And these things have all happened at the Old Turkey Farm in the last 3 years. And in each case, problems were avoided because someone lived on site. And most horse owners expect 24-hour supervision of their horses too. The officer's report suggests perhaps that CCTV might be good enough if someone lived close enough to respond, but the applicant already has CCTV, but she doesn't live close enough to be aware of any problems or respond quickly enough, and there's nowhere else close enough and available, and that's why ultimately someone needs to live on site permanently. However, unfortunately, the caravan for which temporary consent has been granted is badly insulated, it's cold, it's damp, so the application proposes to replace this with a caravan that's more suitable for permanent occupation. There's no plans to replace this with a bricks and mortar home. This permanent caravan is all that the applicant wants. The new caravan would be better located than the current caravan, tucked away in a corner, and the new caravan would replace a number of existing buildings, as mentioned already, so the site's appearance would be improved overall, and the proposal would not harm the greenbelt. So there continues to be a strong justification for someone to live on site, and the proposal meets all the relevant district plan policies, as you've heard. And on that basis, I'd hope that you can approve the application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I must say, I think we've had a very impressive set of public speakers this evening. You've all come in more or less with seconds to spare. Well done, well done. Very good. Indeed, indeed. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Okay, over to members. I've got Rishi and David Andrews in that order.
Thank you, Chairman. My two main concerns were alleviated by conditions 4 and 5, which stipulates that the site would have to be removed if it changed. It can solely be used for equestrian use. My only still slight concern is that I understand the current caravan is not in a good state. I appreciate that, but it is Greenbelt, and what is being proposed is it's a lovely caravan. And I'm not quite sure I'd call it a caravan because it's a 3-bedroom, 2-ensuite, large property. So my only question is, are we, given that there's 16 or 17 horses on site, is such a large caravan really required on a site that is greenbelt? That's my only question.
Thank you. I think it was David Andrews next.
Thank you. Yeah, I have been a little bit troubled by this. A number of us in this room have kept stock in the past. I have certainly. You've got Stevenage a 10-minute drive away. You've got Welwyn Garden City a 15-minute drive away. So in the ideal world, there's no shortage of accommodation, and lots of stockmen and hands now don't necessarily live cheek by jowl with the stock that they're looking after, and I can see there are advantages. But I'm not unsympathetic, and I think the fact that it's worked well for a few years does give me some comfort. I'm a little confused in the report. It says it's south of Datchworth. It's south of Stevenage, but north of Datchworth. But heck, come on. So yeah, broadly, but I'm just wondering. I wouldn't want this to turn into a park home, which became blocked in and you know, became a very permanent feature. And I'm just wondering and looking at officers to see if there's anything there perhaps we should restrict or even extinguish any PDRs that might flow from this just to discourage, because we can't be sure that the business will stay in the same ownership or the same control, and that mobile home potentially could be there in its current form for 25 to 30 years. I think they've got a design life for 20 years, and most of them go on a lot longer than that if they're not mucked about with too much. So that's basically it. But broadly, yeah, I'm comfortable with it.
Okay, thank you. Sally Newton and Ben Crystal.
Yes, I think David's outlined the concerns of anything too permanent and looking in the future. But I would support this if it was an appropriate type of caravan development as determined with the parameters we have, because it isn't just looking after the horses or livestock now. The countryside in East Herts is under attack permanently, has been since lockdown. Most people have CCTV to stop people thieving metal, batteries, or anything they can get at. And sadly, horses. So if I had 17 horses that I couldn't secure with somebody being nearby looking after them, I would be very, very concerned. So the only concern I have is David's extension of, let's make sure it's the right sort of caravan. But in principle, I support it being there for the horses.
Thank you, Sally. Ben Crystal.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions about condition 4. It states that accommodation should be limited to a person solely or mainly working or last working. So does that mean that the person could be retired, could have been a worker there and then retired, and so they could be there for 20 or 30 years, but actually not related to the business anymore? That's one question. And another question is how can that link be overturned? Would that be a matter of planning permission? Or okay.
Thank you, Ben, very much. Okay, officers, Richard. Sorry, apologies, Richard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for these very careful comments. If I can maybe generally take them in turn, some of them may be grouped together. There's clearly some concerns or questions from members about, is this the right caravan? And actually, could we have the final slide, please? Very helpfully didn't put the caravan on the screen. I do apologise. So this is what's proposed. So this is a 3-bed home effectively with internal living space. And we do have to find that balance. We do have to find the balance between supporting and promoting a rural enterprise and business, which is a going concern, and as we've heard, is growing. And members understand the concerns about what might happen to a site which is left unsecured. insecure versus it is green belts, and so we do need to limit development within it. We do think this is appropriate. We do think it is right that it can provide accommodation effectively for a family, because you do, especially given the rural economy and how it stands at the moment, you do want to make sure that you don't narrow your pool of potential workers by just having accommodation which might be suitable for a single person. You do want people to have links and ties to the local area and be supporting the rural economy by having the opportunity for a house to be being there. So it's positive from a ED2, that is protection of the rural economy, and also from the HOU5 perspective, that it is accommodation which can be used by a variety of people. Now, we wouldn't want to go too far with that, because obviously it's only appropriate in the Greenbelt terms if it doesn't have any greater impact on openness. And so if this were larger, significantly larger, we probably would be saying, actually, no, that does have an impact on openness. But if you take it as a whole, the removal shown on the previous 2 slides back to be taken away, to be replaced with this, there is still that reduction in floor area. There is still that reduction in volume. So I'd suggest to members that from a need perspective, the test isn't, is this the minimum accommodation necessary? It's, is the impact of this in Greenbelt terms and openness terms acceptable? Yes, it is, because it's a reduction, if that kind of helps you with that point. Just some points around the appearance. So this would be a caravan which is clad in cladding which is going to be dark green. Just like any other building, it would need to be maintained. It is obviously more temporary in its nature and its construction, but again, that's probably beneficial from the Greenbelt perspective. We couldn't grant permission subject to condition 5 that the building is to be removed if it's a bricks and mortar home. Who would do that? Who would build that, knowing they might need to take it away if that use went away? So there's a balancing act to be had around that as well. And so again, we feel that that's appropriate. Yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't want this to become a park home or an area where there's proliferation of caravans, and that's very much not what's being applied for. The description of development is very clear that this is siting of a caravan for an equestrian worker. Yes, you'd need a variation of condition application to provide evidence as to why that is no longer appropriate. Should somebody want to remove that tie, and would look at that very carefully. It is the case, and it is a good point, that that condition 4 would allow someone who's retired to continue to occupy this. And I think all I've really got to say on that front is that it is a pretty standard wording. It's based very closely on a model condition from the planning inspectorate, and so is used as standard. And it might be that people kind of retire in stages, especially if it's a family business or something like that, and so that could be appropriate. I think I've addressed most of the points. There was obviously some questions around the location of developments, which, yes, thank you for the clarification around its location vis-a-vis Datchworth, and alternative accommodation. Hopefully what I said earlier answers these points.
David.
In many ways, I'd rather I hadn't seen this slide. This is not a caravan. This is a very large park home. It's one of the larger park homes. I've got the brochure on the screen in front of me. It's 55 feet by 22 feet. It has a dining table that will seat 6, possibly 8, and it only takes up 1/3 of the kitchen diner space. It's got 2 master bedrooms, one with ensuite. It's huge. It's not a caravan. Can we adjust that? I had cause earlier to mention my confusion around imperial and metric. Can we make it very, very clear? You don't shackle this up to your Range Rover and take it to the south of France. It ain't a caravan. The nearest it's going to get to the horse that might haul it away is the fact that it's being used in an equestrian environment. I'm not changing my mind, but can we change the language? This is a very, very large mobile, or some might prefer to call it park home. I'm even more concerned now that we drill down on the PDRs.
Thank you. I take the point, and that is what is being proposed. Maybe I don't want to enlarge on this point too much because most people clearly wouldn't take that to be a caravan, but there is a Caravan Act, and that does define what a caravan is. And as long as certain tests are met, which they are in this instance, then it is in planning terms a caravan, although most people may read it as a different way. And so that's why we've used that language. But in any case, I do take the point. I'm sorry, I didn't address the PDR point earlier, and also the tie to the wider site. Because this isn't a home which is separate from the wider site, the description of development isn't a house within use class C3. This wouldn't have any permitted development rights. You could not stick a rear extension on this. What you're actually granting permission for, were you to do it, is the siting of a caravan. That was the point I made earlier around how caravans operate in this little area of planning law. This isn't a home within use class C3 which has permitted development rights. We can make that clear for an informative if members feel that would be helpful. The tie to the wider site is really, really important as to the acceptability of this, and we feel it's intrinsic in condition 4, but should members still have some concerns about it, we could use a condition which we normally use when you have kind of granny annexes or something like that, to say that this part of the site shall not be let out or sold off separately from the wider site, so that can be kind of kept together if members were to feel that was appropriate.
Thank you again, Richard. Rishi and Terence.
Thank you. Just to seek some clarity. So I understand in terms of the condition 4, where if someone were to retire, that would then still be permissible. What then would be the case if the applicant then required further accommodation for someone to then look after the horses, given that this would then be occupied by someone retired? How would that be taken into account when looking at any future application? Would the fact that this already exists preclude or significantly impact on any future caravan? Because otherwise, if people keep retiring, you could end up with quite a few caravans. Terence.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't think this would take that long. Do we need to determine whether we're going to go past midnight again? I don't know, really. Let's fight. Okay, sorry. I'm just thinking I need petrol, you know. A question on the temporary side of it. I've had some experience of these in my building research days. Is it connected to sewerage and utilities? So it's obviously a caravan. You piddle in a bucket, basically, don't you? When you empty it, you know, as you would. Just for everybody at home. Yeah, with a hole in it. And also, which is actually probably not overly relevant to this, but as we're here and we're doing it, I might as well fill my boots. In terms of a temporary accommodation, of course, this could easily be a converted shipping container into something that could be moved away from site. So it could be a series of shipping containers and not just a caravan then in that definition, I guess. Because it would serve in the same way that the caravan would.
Okay, Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, if I've understood your point correctly at the end, then yes, it could be a different structure from this. Yeah, but ultimately that's a drawing which you'd approve if that's the case, and so that's what you'd end up with. In terms of the connections, it is to be connected to the existing network, which I can check is not main sewage. I think there's an existing cesspit or some other system on site, and it would be connected to that. If you're asking around the degree of permanence or connection to the ground, which is one of the tests around movable structures and whether or not planning permission is required, we are satisfied that structure itself does still meet that definition of removable structure. And coming to your point, Councillor, regarding what might happen in the future, I suppose that would be assessed at that point. So someone would need, say, if someone did try to bring forward, if someone retired in this dwelling and a new caravan or temporary building were required, we'd assess it at that point. We'd assess it against HAU 5, which talks about it being necessary. And I suspect we'd ask the questions as to, well, why can't you use the existing one if that person is not actively engaged in the operation of the site? I can't prejudice the consideration of a future application, but I would imagine that that's the route that we would go down.
All right. Briefly, if possible, David.
Am I seeing decking and a veranda here?
So the site's raised. The building is raised up on that brick plinth, which you can see at the bottom. But no. Yeah, maybe I can double check, but there's not an external decking. I wonder if it's like a Juliet balcony.
Okay. Okay. I'm mindful of the clock at the moment, Sally. So it's your call.
Very
but,
quick,
Encourage
very
you to be
quick.
brief. Yeah.
The person who's going to be in this caravan, is it the owner of the yard or an employee?
Yeah, the intention set out in the submission is an employee, but to be clear, for the purposes, if you grant consent, that's set
Because
out,
if
it
it's an
doesn't matter.
employee, nobody's going to retire in it, and that should be a condition, because when they retire, they leave, and you get another employee. I'm just wanting clarification, that's all.
So we aren't proposing to restrict it. So the applicant has said that it is for an employee. That is their intention. In policy terms, apart from this issue of someone retiring and what happens at that point, it doesn't really matter, because it is someone who is engaged in that rural operation. And I think if someone did retire in place, if I can use that language, and that became a problem, we'd assess it at that point. Would be my advice. Okay,
very good. I've just got, if I may, one point. Part of this is there's some degree of trade-off. So the idea is that the caravan goes in and other buildings come out. I think it'd be quite important to members to be sure that that would be enforced and indeed enforceable. And presumably, what would the sequence of events be? That the other structures come out before the caravan goes in, or vice versa?
Before it's occupied. So effectively that would allow it to be taken to site, but before someone moves in, they need to be removed. And that seems fair, if I can put it that way, considering the existing temporary residential accommodation on the site. So that's how the sequencing would work. Yeah, before we recommend conditions, we need to make sure that they meet the tests, the legal tests, one of which is that we're satisfied as to the enforceability and the precision of the conditions. And so we're recommending them to you on that basis. Condition 6 is clear as to what is required, and so an enforcement officer could visit the site and make a determination as to whether or not those structures have been removed and whether or not the proposal was occupied, which is what would be required on that basis. This is a site which is known to our enforcement team anyway, and there is some ongoing dialogue around establishing what's happened with some of the structures on the site, and so we are satisfied that the conditions will be complied with. For the determination of a planning application, one must assume that the conditions will be applied with in any case, but it is one where there is active dialogue, and so we have some comfort around that. We do understand the importance of enforcement in a rural area, especially, as I say, Chair, where there's this trade-off, and so it is something which our enforcement team is already aware of.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned in passing a granny annex condition, which you offered could be added. Could you just put a little bit more flesh on those bones? What would that be?
Yeah, so effectively it would say the caravan or the development hereby approved shall not be rented out, let out, or sold separately from the use of the wider site as the old turkey farm. So it effectively stops someone hiving it off into two sites.
I think I'm sensing a degree of support for that in the room, but we'll come back to that when we take the vote. Okay, I'll make this the last one, David, if that's okay.
Yeah, could you go back to the map of the site and just show us where this is actually going to be sited? Because I'm not clear on that.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it there. Good, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're there. I think we're ready to proceed to a vote. So I'm going to invite a proposer and a seconder, but if I may, obviously if the proposer and seconder are happy to do this, can that be on the basis that we will have the additional granny annex condition added? So do I have a proposer in the room, please? Caroline Redfern is proposing a seconder. Suzanne Rutland Barsby is our seconder. All those in favour? Very good. Okay. In that case, that application together with the granny annex condition is approved. And just for formality's sake, just let me actually do the formalities. Sorry. Yes, so we have just debated. Apologies. Yes, we've just debated application 321-1925 FUL, which relates to the removal of outbuildings and the permanent siting of a caravan to be occupied by an equestrian worker and associated works at the Old Turkey Farm, Brookbridge Lane, Datchworth. And the decision that we've come to is that the application will be granted with the addition of an extra condition, which we are referring to as the granny annex condition, but Richard understands what that means. So yeah, good. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Peter is going to get Tony So back into the room, but we don't have very much more to deal with. But I think we need to wait. We need to wait for Tony, don't we? I think strictly. Okay, we're now moving on to item 7. This is items for reporting and noting. We don't vote on this item, so unless unusually anyone's got any comment, we don't take comments. That leaves item 8, urgent business. I'm unaware of any urgent business. There is no urgent business, in which case the meeting closes at 9:22. Thank you all very much. Yep, sure. That's number 1. Thank you.